Thank you very much, Madam Leader. Thank you so much for, I thank you for putting together this task force to work on a very, very important issue. I often talk about that weekend back in October 1960 down in Atlanta, Georgia, on the campus of Morehouse College, when I first met John Lewis. That 1960, 5 years before we were able to secure a Voting Rights Act. As I was reflecting earlier today on all that has transpired and the fact that when the leader and I first talked about this task force, it was an aftermath of the last November elections when we saw a significant fall off of participation on the part of those that we worked so hard here to try to improve their lot. And we talked about things we might be able to do to re-engage people that we thought really need to be involved in the process. We talked about all that we read about Ferguson, Missouri, and the fact that when we looked at the local participation there, we saw that in the last municipal elections back in April, last year or year before last, the participation was 6%, the single digit, 6%. In the election, in a community that was over 65% minority, only a 6% participation in the municipal election. And that was troubling. And so in our discussions as to what we could do going forward, we thought that to get a group to concentrate on this. In one of our meetings, I remember talking with Lucille Roybal-Allard, who is here today, a member of this task force, and she told me about her experiences last November, and people kept asking her. I'll let her use the Spanish, I'll use the English translation, what for? What for? That bothered me a great deal. And so we've decided that we want to get voters engaged in the process again. Earlier today, I took a look at a video or film, wasn't video back then, I guess you would call it, of a 1966 speech made by Martin Luther King Jr. at a little town in my district, Kingstree, South Carolina, less than a year after the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. He came to that community to talk about voting. And he would plead with people to get registered to vote. And once you get registered, he said at one point in his speech, go and get 10 of your neighbors and get them registered. That effort has led to great voter participation in that county. And those people, the vast majority of them, I don't care when the election is or what it's about, they vote. And I want to really rekindle that emotion. So I'm going to thank the following people who have agreed to serve on this task force. Representative Lucille Roybal-Allard from California, Representative Nydia Velasquez of New York, Representative Barbara Lee from California, Representative Andrew Carson from Indiana, Representative Cedric Richmond from Louisiana, Representative Matt Cartwright from Pennsylvania, Representative Hakeem Jeffers from New York, Representative Michelle Lujan Grisham from New Mexico, Representative Grace Ming from New York. I don't see Grace. I hope I told her about this. Representative Brendan Boyle, also from Pennsylvania. Let me close and yield to any questions you may have or any comment any one of the members may want to make. and say this. I have now seen the movie Selma twice, and I plan to see it again in this building next Tuesday evening. The second time I watched it was last week, and I watched it sitting with my just turned 18-year-old granddaughter. I didn't say anything to her about the movie. I just told her that I was sponsoring the movie for members of my staff and others in the community. We rented out a theater of 120 seats. Within 2 hours, we had to go back and get a 300-seat theater. But I was really focusing on my granddaughter. So I sat next to her during the movie. She had her iPhone, doing what 18-year-olds do. I'm like a granddaddy. I'm scared to look and see what was going on that iPad. So I kept looking forward. But she stayed. Even when the movie came on, she didn't turn off that iPhone until those little 4 girls was walking down the staircase in the church, going to the Sunday school room, and the bomb went off. At that point, she turned off her iPhone and intently watched the movie. Even asked me at one point a question about who that person was that was having a little interchange with John Lewis about whether or not to march. James Foreman, who was one of my best friends in the movement. And I explained who James Foreman was, and she was a little bit surprised to know that I knew him and he was a friend. But the next morning, when the movie was over, she went home. I got a call the next morning. She wanted to have lunch. And so I said, okay. And she had told me what time, and I objected to the time. And I says, well, can't we do it a little earlier? She says, no, because I'm going to register to vote. And when I finish my registration, I'm going to come and have lunch with you. And she brought some of her friends with her. And we talked about the movie, and we talked about voting. And when lunch was over, the rest of her friends, they left and went to voter registration office. I think that we're at a time that young people who seem not to be participating at the same level as young people did when I was young, that we can get people re-engaged once again. And that's what this task force is all about. And I want to thank all these members who have agreed to serve. And I'll now yield to any one of them who may want to say something if they care to.
Take questions.
And we'll take questions.
Athena Jones from CNN. 2 questions. One is there any particular piece of legislation that you envision helping with this re-engagement process, and when do you plan to put it forward? The other question is about speech last night. I don't know if you noticed, or you probably noticed, there was a point when the president talked about voting being a sacred right. I'm getting the words wrong. A lot of Democrats stood, not a lot of Republicans stood. Were you surprised to see that disparity?
Well, I've grown old enough not to be surprised as much as anything. I was disappointed, and I'm very disappointed that after the Supreme Court issued its decision, which basically said that the formula that you've been holding on to since 1965 is now outdated. Congress, you should fix this. Update the formula. So we came back, and this is the piece of legislation that you're asking about, and we fashioned some amendments. These members worked very hard on helping to put those amendments together. And Representative Sensenbrenner and Shabbat from Ohio, Sensenbrenner from Wisconsin, Shabbat from Ohio, the 2 Republicans worked with Representatives Conyers and Scott on compromise legislation. My constituents did not like the compromise. They did not like it. They thought it was a faulty compromise. But it was a compromise, and I adhered to Lyndon Johnson's theory that a half loaf is better than no loaf at all. And I thought this would get us started. And so that's the first piece of legislation we're going to work on. Mr. Sensenbrenner has told me he's not giving up on this. He plans to come back within 2 weeks. I think he said 2 weeks with another with the same piece of legislation to try to get it going on. So we're going to work on that. We also had the voter empowerment program that John Lewis is the author of. We're updating that because that bill was written before the Supreme Court, the impact of some of these recent decisions. So we're going to update that to incorporate these decisions, and hopefully we will bring that back to work on. Now, all we can say is these are good bills. They are bills designed to get people back involved in the process. I get very, very upset when I hear young people, 25 and 30 years old, say to me they see no reason to vote, and they start bringing up these recent laws that's being passed in various states, one being my own home state, designed to suppress voting and designed to not respect college students and where they live, and allowing them to vote at their campuses, and not letting their student IDs be used to demonstrate who they are. They can take that ID, go into any bank in this country and get served, get checks cashed, but they're telling them that's not good enough to register to vote. These young people are very upset about those kinds of laws, and this committee is going to work on doing what we can to get them engaged again in this process to help us change it. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering if you could talk about the tangible goals that you see coming from this task force. Is it X million more people registered? Is it an increased percentage of minorities and young people voting? Do you have an outline of what the goals are? And on the bill with Mr. Sensenbrenner, what's your strategy? I understand that there's 11 Republican co-sponsors, but what's the strategy to, I mean, is it shaming Republicans to schedule a vote? Is it trying to work with Republican leadership? How do you get it from a co-sponsorship of Republicans to an actual vote?
Well, no, we want these amendments passed. The last time we took each member, we want this to be a bipartisan bill. We said, okay, Democrats, see can you find a Republican partner? That's how we got to 11. We started out with 2 and 2, and it got up to 11. We're going to still seek Republican partners. I'm going to be talking with the Speaker and the leader, and hopefully we can get them to agree to bring the bill to the floor. I believe, sincerely, that if those amendments were brought to the floor, I believe they would pass. I think there are 218 people in the House of Representatives who will vote yes on this legislation. And so we're going to keep working as we know to do. It may, I don't get discouraged with these kinds of things. I keep plugging along, I think all these members will do the same thing. We think we can get this done. We think it should get done. Now, the first goal, of course, is to pass the amendments. A second goal on voting has to do with the Voter Empowerment Act, Representative John Lewis's bill. And as the leader has said, we do believe that we ought to be working on Citizens United. And this is McIntosh that follows Citizens United that takes away the caps on financing campaigns. All of these things that we have heard from members that we think are working in tandem to suppress the vote, we are going to be working on. Thank you very much. I want to thank all the members here. I want to thank the leader. Let me just close by, since the leader has called me out on this, quoted from that great document, King's letter from the Birmingham City Jail. Many of you recall that that letter was written in response to a letter that he had received. And in the letter that he had received, the ministers who wrote in their letter, 8 ministers, one was from South Carolina, who I knew, said to him they thought that his cause was right, but his timing was wrong. And King, in his answer then, told him that time is neutral. Time is never right. Time is never wrong. Time is always where we make it. And he said to us on that day that he would be coming to the conclusion that the people of ill will in our society make a much better use of time than the people of goodwill. And that's a very profound statement. The people of ill will in our society seem to make a much better use of time than the people of goodwill. We want to engage the people of goodwill in our society and make good use of our time in doing so. Thank you so much.